Hello. Man.
Hello.
Visited like a few times before this was done.
Oh.
I'm hoping I can make it to a little front, but I drove through town and there's like a Dollar General and I actually left later. But thank you, I will walk around and enjoy it.
Sure.
Where'd you drive from?
Scott Township.
Oh, okay.
If you would also sign our book over
Certainly.
the passenger side. These are all original.
So I meant to ask, but I overheard, so that platforms for that scale is, I mean, for the scale is a scale? Okay, all right. Did anybody ever still work at something local government? Oh.
Some people do not.
Good afternoon, can you hear me? Yeah. Is that too loud, Bill? Great, well, thank you all for being here today. Is anyone else over there, Pat, or are we all good?
I think you're good.
Oh, you're too late, Sorry, Dave.
Too late.
There's a couple chairs up here, too. Or there's front row seats right here.
Yeah. Front of the bus. Go in the front.
It's like church, the last one didn't have to sit up front.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't see you here.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Josh Stell. I am the Vice Chair of the Nicholson Heritage Association. So thank you all for being here today. It's a great day to be outside. I'm sorry I missed the peak of the color of the trees. I heard that was last week, but hey, yeah, it still looks nice. On behalf of the entire Nicholson Heritage Association Board, we have some of our board members here, which feel free to stand up. Our chairman, Bob. Okay. Joan Jenkins, our So we're excited to host our first speaker of our speaker series here at the recently renovated and open Nicholson Tourism Center at the historic Delaware Lackawanna Western Railroad Station. So before I turn the mic over to Pat, I wanted to give a little history about him and what he currently does at Steamtown, in case you haven't met him yet or are not aware. So after looking at Pat's resume, I thought to myself, what a fascinating journey. He's done some interesting things, which I'll explain to you. He was a history graduate assistant, graduated from the University of Wyoming with both a bachelor's and master's degree in history, interned at the Wyoming State Museum in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and I'm biased because I currently work in D.C., but he also interned in Washington, D.C. with the Senate office. Since 1984, he's been employed with the National Park Service. He told me a historic tidbit that I found interesting and wanted to share. He attended the same high school, junior college, and university as Dick Cheney, but not at the same time. Since 1998, Pat has been the historian archivist with the Park Service at Steamtown National Historic Site. He has a lot on his plate, from preparing cultural resource studies to carrying out Steamtown's oral history program, to overseeing their archives and library. Additionally, he assists with the park's museum collection when needed. It's as duties as assigned, right? We're familiar with that. As well as providing technical assistance, sharing resource knowledge, and representing Steamtown at meetings, and giving a presentation like he is here today. From 1993, Pat worked for the National Park Service in Washington, D.C. as a computer specialist, where he collected and analyzed curatorial reports and projects, provided technical support, and assisted in service-wide training in museum software. Before that, from 1989 to 1993, Pat was staff curator for the National Park Service, again in D.C., and Mrs. Loretta Slakowski just showed up. There he provided technical support for the Region's Art and Museum collection, oversaw all aspects of automation, and provided technical assistance for other entities. From 1985 to 87, he was a museum technician at Death Valley National Monument in Death Valley, California. Yes, he served there twice, he survived. While there, he physically cared for the collection at Scotty's Castle, which is a historic house, and oversaw other museum technicians and cataloged and maintained the site's collection. At the end of the day, he knows what he's doing, right? I mean, that's what this tells you. With that, Pat, I am going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Josh. Got the little Ron hat, which means I know what I'm talking about. Don't believe it for a minute. I was at Steamtown once, and one of the first things that I dealt with is I got a telephone call, and there had been a bunch of rail fans discussing why Bridge 60 is called Bridge 60. And somebody answered the phone, and they said, oh, it's the 60th bridge. No, actually, it's 60 miles to Hoboken. No, it's not. And they said, well, a park ranger told me, so it has to be true. And I said, well, I hate to tell you that sometimes even park rangers are misinformed. It's the 60th bridge going west to east in the Scranton division of the DL&W. And somebody said, well, then tell me what's the number for the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct. And I said, well, at the time, the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct didn't exist. So there wasn't a number, a bridge number. And when they finally did start reassigning bridge numbers, they didn't by the mile marker. So that's what it's recorded by now by the railroad. But anyhow, what else do I need to do? I need to get the clicker. Now, I'm usually pretty informal, so if something really sparks your interest, let me know and I'll see if I can answer it right there, okay? See, why am I here? I ask that every day. Supposedly, I'm a subject matter expert, but my master's thesis was on the trustees of Dartmouth College. I sort of focused on colonial American history in my early years, and went to a seminar about trustees, and it ended up being on Dartmouth College. Also, when I was doing it, I was into cross-country skiing. Cross-country skiing is really good at Dartmouth. Another reason why I'm here is I'm smarter than you all. I went to the University of Wyoming, just like Dick Cheney did. We also had a guy named James Watt, who was Secretary of the Interior, that also was a distinguished alumni from the University of Wyoming. Because I remember when I went to my very first park, which was Rocky Mountain, we had a memo from the superintendent telling us that kilowatt save a tree were not appropriate bumper stickers to have on your vehicle. So, another reason is I wear a round hat, so park rangers know everything, right? So that's why I'm here. Actually, the reason I'm really here is I oversee the most comprehensive collection of records dealing with this area and the railroad. And a little bit of it rubs off. I've been here for almost 25 years now. So a little bit's rubbed off. Now, what do we have at Steamtown? People often ask me and say a heck of a lot of stuff. And just for the DL&W Railroad, we have the files of the General Superintendent. The General Superintendent oversaw the day-to-day activity of the railroad, which included personnel files, as well as what the railroad police did, as well as just general stuff that went on. And most of that stuff, from those files, were found in Scranton. They were in the old passenger station, which is now the Radisson Hotel. And we had General Superintendent files there. We also have the Chief Engineer of the DL&W, his files. When I say Chief Engineer, it's not the choo-choo engineer that goes choo-choo. It's the guy that oversaw the built environment, which includes things like the building we're in today, where we might be able to have some information, or the viaduct just outside here. So we have that, Chief Engineer files. We also had the corporate record of the DL&W that at one time was given to Syracuse University. And about 15 years ago, Syracuse figured they didn't want to keep the stuff anymore. And where was the most appropriate place for them to go? Steamtown. And we got those. Included in that, what we received from Syracuse were glass plate negatives. 20,000 glass plate negatives documenting the DL&W Railroad, including the construction of the viaduct here. So we have quite a bit of information. We also have just general correspondence, millions of pieces of correspondence that explain what the railroad did from day to day. It keeps my life interesting. Here's one example of one of the pieces of correspondence. So some of you people from the Nicholson area might side with this guy, Judson, the Reverend Judson N. Bailey. Anybody ever hear of him?
No, sir.
No?
Methodist minister.
Okay, well, I guess he was a reverend in Nicholson, and he wrote a letter to the president of the DL&W saying, we'd rather have you call it the Nicholson Bridge and not the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct. So even in 1916, that was an issue for discussion, and the president said, sorry, we name it what we want to. One thing weird about the DL&W is it named its viaducts after the body of water it went over.
Right.
So there was the Collins Hill Viaduct in New Jersey. There was the Martins Creek Viaduct not too far from here, as well as the Delaware River Viaduct. So they were all named by the railroad after the body of water they went over. Otherwise, the one in New Jersey was the, I forgot it all. No, it wasn't that terribly important. But, you know, Martins Creek Viaduct, oftentimes it's called the Kingsley Viaduct, by the way. So, just kind of interesting how they did it.
We're taking Amesburg.
Amesburg, that's it. You get a prize. See, I don't usually do this. I'm a historian. I hide in archival areas. I don't talk to people. Okay, and Truesdale was the president of the DL&W Railroad. During the time of the coal strikes in the early 1900s, he was identified as one of the coal barons. He replaced Sam Sloan as president of the DL&W, and Sam Sloan was, in his day, he rubbed elbows with President Lincoln. Truesdale associated people more like McKinley. He was also great-grandfather of William Moeller.
Robert Muller.
Robert, yeah, thanks. Very good. Robert Muller, which I kind of found very interesting. Also, I wasn't surprised terribly much by it, since it seemed that Republicanism was in their DNA for Truesdale as well as his family. And politically, a Republican, when McKinley was assassinated, Truesdale actually shut the railroad down for a day, out of respect for the president. But he didn't get along with Theodore Roosevelt. He was the one that fought with him about the coal mine strikes and everything. So anyhow, when we try and put the Clark Summit, the Halstead cutoff, I try and put it into sort of historic context, engineering context, and geographic context. You know, the historic content, what was going on when they were building the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct, 1913 to 1915. One of the biggest things that was going on was the beginning of World War I. Those are some Germans heading off to war thinking that it was going to be a simple victory. It wasn't. And, you know, even though Nicholson was a great distance from Germany and Europe, there were victims to the war. Now, one of the victims was Frank J. Duffy, who actually was the highest ranking officer that worked for the DL&W Railroad out of Scranton. So he actually was killed in World War I. Another victim of World War I, that's Duffy Park in Scranton, that's why it's named after him, was a model. In 1913, the DL&W had models of what this viaduct was going to look like, and they were convinced to send it to Germany to an industrial exposition. Packaged it up, sent it to Germany. After the war, they couldn't find it. Even 10 years after the war, we have correspondence in German dealing with, hey, do you know what happened to this model? And they never did find it. So that's another victim of World War I. Now, who was president at the time? Who was president during World War I? Okay, if I would have said the wrong one, you would have corrected me. Yeah, Woodrow Wilson. And again, he was a Democrat, and he wasn't too popular among the people on the railroad. And if you look, the guy is working on a manure wagon right now. And if you look closer, vote for Wilson. Yeah, 100 years ago, they were just as mean and nasty as we are nowadays with politics. But I thought that was it.
How about the car, the Lehigh Valley car?
Oh yeah, well, that picture is actually taken at Moscow. Yeah. Go back one.
Do we know who that was crossing the track?
No, you might be able to figure it out someday.
I thought maybe it was Wilson.
No, but anyhow, this bridge here, there was an overcrossing at Moscow station. And that was documented to be there, that the water tower was taken down. But vote for Wilson. And other things as we start looking at the engineering context stuff. And one of the big things that happened, while the viaduct was going up was the sinking of the Titanic. And that was, it's hard to believe how advanced the technology was to produce a ship of that size. But we all know what happened to it. Well, one thing that I never envisioned when we talked about the Titanic was its connection with the Lackawanna Railroad and Nicholson. Because one of the first calls I got when I showed up at Steamtown as a historian was somebody called up and said, I want to know everything you know about Botsford. William Cole Botsford. And I go, who the heck is that? And they go, he's the guy that planned and drew the plans up. He's the one who envisioned the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct. And I said, no, I can't find anything on him tied to the viaduct. And I looked in the correspondence, I looked in other places. And the only place I could find a reference to Botsford, because even the guy comes up to me and says, yeah, you go to the website to do a web search, and they even have a picture of the viaduct on there. He designed it. I said, no. From what I figured out was he drew perspective drawings. When I took architectural drawings, they used to have me draw a cube or something, and with a perspective point and everything. And he did that. And these are the works of Botsford. And he liked including airplanes. He liked including cars and stuff. But he also did one drawing, a perspective drawing of what the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct was going to look like. And which I thought was interesting, but he was not the person, the sole force behind it. Any questions about this? I thought it was kind of neat. But it's interesting when people are telling you and swearing that this guy planned, and he's got about 20 different perspective drawings at different places on the DL&W, and people are saying he was the primary person. Well, we have all the correspondence of the president of the railroad from 1898 to 1916, and he did not say one word about Botsford. I think he was more of a low-key person in the railroad office. So, anyhow, I thought that was neat. And people were actually saying that he planned, and basically under his direction, before he died, well before the Tunkhannock Viaduct started being built.
Hey Pat, I'll just say thanks for bringing that up because I have people contacting me about the Nicholson Heritage Association website and insist that I put that in on our website as well. And of course, I always say, well, I've already talked to the person who knows about this. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and he had a very interesting life. He went to Cornell University. In his opinion, like my opinion, I ran the Park Service for 20 years. And in his opinion, he ran the DL&W, was at his beck and call. Another thing about this period of time, while they were building this viaduct, the country was building the Panama Canal. And I thought that was pretty impressive because at the time they had reinforced concrete construction. They had big major earth movers. They tried to build the Panama Canal in the 1800s and it just didn't work. But during the early 1900s, the same technology that they used here, they used at the Panama Canal. Except those weren't Panama Canal pictures. Those were cut-off pictures. Now these are the real Panama Canal pictures. Can you tell any difference? They use the same technology, they use the same large earth-moving equipment. Although they did have Teddy Roosevelt at the Panama Canal said it, he made it sound like he did it all by himself.
Fully for him.
Fully for him. Now see, here are real pictures of the viaduct construction. It's really hard to tell one from the other.
Wow.
And even the railroad people, I was particularly hit by this mention. A great deal said and published about the engineering feats involved in the construction of the Panama Canal. But if the truth were known, the public would realize that the work which has been done and is being done by a few of the leading railroads of this country, including the Lackawanna, exceeds in cost and engineering skill what was basically done in Panama. So this was the center of engineering at the time. A lot of the stuff they learned in constructing the viaducts of the Lackawanna were used in the railroad as well, or Panama Canal as well, as I babble on. Another thing is when they were building the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct, they got a couple different requests for the plans. How significant the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct was. Here's one person from the Committee on Memorials, the American Peace Centenary Committee, which was basically an organization that recognized the friendship between Canada and the United States, and they were trying to come up with an idea of what could they do to show the bond between the U.S. and Canada, because they were like celebrating the 100th anniversary of the War of 1812, where we tried to take over Canada. And they actually asked if they could get the plans for the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct, and if everything would have worked out, although I don't think they had the money the DL&W had, I think they might have tried to build something similar to that within sight of the Niagara Falls. Another place that asked about plans for the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct was from Washington, D.C., not very far from where Josh works. The chief engineer of the War Department, they were building something called the Key Bridge. Has anybody ever been on the Key Bridge? I used to run on it every single day. They wanted to secure information about how the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct went up, or to look into using it on the Key Bridge. And I'm not sure 100%, but they seem to have used it, because there's the Key Bridge.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Does that look familiar?
Yeah.
Somewhat. And then we do have correspondence between these people that built the Key Bridge, which under the War Department, and the engineer of the DL&W. So I thought that was interesting. And again, when you start looking at these things, people are talking about bridges and viaducts. Now, does anybody know the difference between a viaduct and a bridge? What's that?
viaduct goes over a valley or body of water, you know. I'm not sure about the bridge.
And, well, the difference between a bridge and a viaduct, and I learned this because somebody corrected me when I said, I called it the Nicholson Bridge, and they said, that's not a bridge, that's a viaduct. Well, by definition, a viaduct is a bridge for carrying a road or railroad over a valley or the like, consisting of a number of short spans. So a viaduct has short spans. If it's just one straight span, it's a bridge. If it's multiple spans, it could be called a viaduct, but it also could be called a bridge. So,
The bridges down in Harrisburg that look like that one that you showed,
that's a viaduct.
Yep.
Well, it's also a bridge.
and it looked like the same person might have designed it.
Might have designed both of them. They were going up at the same period of time, and they were reading the same engineering manuals and stuff. So, yeah, they had quite a few of them. But, so a bridge can be a viaduct, and a viaduct can be a bridge, but some bridges can't be a viaduct, if that makes any sense. I think I probably confused the matter even more. Now, is this a bridge or a viaduct?
That's a trussel.
That's a bridge.
No, that's a.
Viaduct.
It's a viaduct.
It's a trussel.
If they got trestles, so those are short spans, so this would be called a viaduct, but it could also be called a bridge.
Is that the one that viaduct?
However you pronounce it.
That's the one that went down.
Yeah, and, thing is, when, from our knowledge, when they were building, working on the Clark Summit, the Halstead cutoff and everything else, they were looking at the possibility of using steel as opposed to reinforced concrete on the bridge. And which one is most effective? Any idea, is it steel?
They couldn't get the kind of steel problem, right?
Well, it's hard to say. Steel viaducts are cheaper. Steel viaducts can go up faster, and they require less labor when you're putting it together. So maybe you might say a steel viaduct's more usable, user-friendly. But, hey, look at there, the Kinsua Bridge.
Not there anymore.
Yeah. Yes. And that's when you say, well, reinforced concrete construction lasts longer. We can tell that now because the Kinsua Viaduct isn't standing anymore. Nicholson Viaduct is. It's lasted over 100 years. Less likely to be seriously damaged by an accident or sabotage. Believe it or not, they did have, during World War I, they had soldiers on the viaduct here making sure nobody blew it up or anything. That would have been a little difficult. And I think I'd rather be on a concrete viaduct than on a trestle, a steel trestle. Personally, I don't even think you can get me on top of the viaduct up there because I'm so scared of heights. And there's a picture of the Kinsua Viaduct Bridge after it blew down. So yeah, I think I'd go with a concrete, steel reinforced viaduct. Okay, so we did that. Geographic context. And DL&W did build 4 major viaducts, one in New Jersey, 2 in Pennsylvania, and 1 between Jersey and Pennsylvania. And so they were pretty good at building viaducts, and they were the largest steel reinforced concrete railroad bridges ever built. At first it was the Delaware River Bridge, the Collinskill Viaduct, the Kingsley or Martins Creek Viaduct was the biggest viaduct for a couple months before this viaduct was completed. But even when they planned this cutoff, the Pennsylvania cutoff, it actually goes from here and follows up here to Halstead. But at one point, they were looking at the cutoff going straight from here all the way across to Nichols. And if they did that, they would have had to put in almost a dozen similar viaducts to the Tunkhannock Creek viaduct. So I think cost finally got rid of that, but that would have been quite a cutoff.
What about the Straka viaduct?
Straka Viaduct, while it's a neat structure, it was much smaller. It was also a masonry viaduct. And it was built almost 50, 60 years before the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct. So that was from the archives of the DL&W Railroad. So that wasn't part of the DL&W stuff. And also included in there was drawings and comparisons and how much money was going to be saved because you took a degree or two off of the approach on the railroad. So this is like the plan. And you know what I found interesting when they built the Pennsylvania cutoff, they had 10 sections and they put them up for bid. So the contractors bid on each of the 10 sections, and they were all 10 different entities were building at the same time to get this completed. It took about 3 years to build the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct and the Pennsylvania cutoff, but just quite a construction piece. You know, I can't even. This again is from the DL&W comparative summary of the distance. You know, they cut 3.6 miles off of it. But all the money they spent, they made this money back within a year or two after it was completed. So it was much more efficient for railroading. Constructed in 10 sections. And just to look at those 10 sections is kind of interesting because there's different construction, overpasses, underpasses, tunnels, cuts, and fills. So like the first section, John Clark Summit with Robert Grace Contracting. Here's what they built. Now, some of you may actually recognize some of the names just because the properties some of these things went through identified with the landowner. Yeah. So, and to make the railroad flatter and more efficient, you had to do lots of cuts. And when you cut all the dirt off, you had to put it somewhere, so they built fills. Make it flatter and easier to ride through. Yeah, that's Clark Summit still. And you see, these are from the glass plate negative collection of the DL&W. They had their photographers. Section 2. And so slate and cut. Roadway arch. Now I'll tell you, a lot of these structures, if they're still standing, they're not nearly as cleared off as this. You can barely see them nowadays.
Is this one still up?
I don't know. Some of the locals might be able to tell me.
Because some of them they tore down.
Yes, some of them they
The
tore down.
road and the, I don't know what the name of that other road is, that's down by Dave Plummer's house.
Yeah, see, one of these days, I would really love to walk the entire, if they let me out of work long enough. Work Clark Summit to Halstead and actually document what's still there.
Well, if you ever do that, make it public.
Yeah, bring your camera on a day like today. Now, also, besides the construction correspondence, the photographs, we have over 50,000 drawings of the DL&W blueprints. So some of those structures, some of those bridges, overcrosses, undercrosses, we have additional documentation for them as well. Now, I love it. You know, when you try and figure out the arches, you know, okay, there's the arch. That doesn't look like much of an arch. Well, you fill in the dirt around it. That's how it works. Section 3, again, another major cut. Section 3, Tunkhannock Creek Fill and Arch, Halsted Cut, Gilmore Cut, and Arch Bridge. A lot of work went into this.
Yes.
It's a major engineering feat that the Pennsylvania cutoff, not just the viaduct, but all these other pieces that sort of went in, because you could have built the biggest and best viaduct in the world, but you had to connect both ends of it someplace.
And this one that came out of a tunnel.
Yeah.
That's technical, I think.
Yeah, that's actually looking westbound.
No, yes, it is. I see then, you can see some of the stuff that still exists is pretty much overgrown. But again, we have, architectural drawings of some of these features. And you can just sort of go from one end to the other. It's just like, opens your eyes up. And DW Clear, section 4. Yeah,
There's the tunnel.
there's the tunnel. There's a plan of the tunnel. Then section 5, we're finally up to this area. Okay, Creek Viaduct, Stanton Fill, Pickering Cut. Have to throw in a color picture every now and then. I hear they're taking this picture from the Pickering Cut. Nicholson Roadway Arch. Jim going to section 6. So all of these different things went in to build this one cutoff.
Pat, we were told, or data shows that from Clark Summit to Halsted, the criteria was they never exceed 3% grade in either direction, and we understood that it was never approached. It was always less than, and never approached 3% grade, which is very key to freight moving.
Yes, made it much more efficient. And then you get the section number 8, where they built the Martins Creek Viaduct, or Kingsley Bridge, whichever you like to call it. Yeah. Section 10, and they get the Halsted. I could spend a heck of a lot more time improving this, but it just blows your mind. And again, when people start saying, oh, the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct was the cutoff. No, there were 20, 30, 40 other features that had to be done. And, they put all this stuff in, and then they went through with the rail and put that in. It wasn't like they put the rail in. It's not like when they did the Transcontinental Railroad, where they just built, and they actually built past the other people coming from the other side. They basically had the whole area cleared out, and then they went in and put the tracks in, as well as some of the buildings. And now, what got finished first? The Martins Creek Viaduct? I know somebody knows that.
Orange Creek.
Martins Creek. Well, you can actually see a race here. Construction started in February 1913. Down here is the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct at the bottom, and up here is Martins Creek Viaduct. And yet by the month, we have blueprints showing how much of the viaducts were built. So the bottom is Tunkhannock Creek, which I lost a little bit of the bottom. Martins Creek is up here.
Pat, is that a video and is that available on the Steamtown website?
No, it's not. I have it as a PowerPoint.
Okay.
So you can sort of see it going up, and Tunkhannock Creek at the bottom, they had problems with the center column. That took quite an engineering feat, so that slowed them down.
We're told it was 94 feet to bedrock.
Yeah,
The quicksand.
it was not easy. But the thing is, when they finished the Martins Creek Viaduct, they got most of it finished, they were still working on the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct. So this was pretty much finished, and what are we gonna do when you finish something? Let's have a party. And there was they weren't putting the tracks across the Martins Creek Viaduct at this time because they were still waiting for the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct to get finished. So what they did is they had a party. The one thing about the Martins Creek Viaduct that's bigger than the DL&W, than the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct, is it's 3 cars wide. So they have a lot more room to set up for a party.
We have a original picture of them partying on the bridge somewhere in our archives. We have
Yeah, but there they had the flag and everything else, and there's pictures of the party. So they had a band, had people partying, had a good old time.
Oh, the cloud dance.
Cloud dance, yeah. You approach the railroad, you can tell them how that resulted. Saying, oh, we'd like to commemorate the cloud dance, and the railroad goes, you aren't getting up on our bridge.
We wanted, I think at the time, there was still an excursion coming from Steamtown. Our proposal was stop the train, let a couple people off, and just simulate, the cloud dance for a few minutes, and the railroads didn't move.
Yeah, but if we look up here, somebody's sawing on a violin, there's a bunch of older ladies kind of looking down their nose at some people. I don't know if I but it's an interesting time. There's a kid with little breeches on, a little bit of everything. So they had a party.
Yes, they did.
And now concluding the race, Martins Creek's pretty much done. Totally finished December of 1914 for that. Come on, Tunkhannock. There you go. Get that middle part done. So it was completed in June, and we had the official grand opening of the Pennsylvania cutoff in November of 1915. 1915. I'm sorry. Yeah. And then here's this, just because people like this place to take a picture from, you can see the Martins Creek Viaduct being built. So that's that. Whew. Oh, one other thing that was added to the Tunkhannock Creek Viaduct was this sign, Lackawanna Railroad, Lackawanna RR, which is kind of interesting. A couple questions about it. Josh can't tell me. Who installed it? Anybody know?
We have all the information, but I can't remember his name.
Yeah, it was a Jasner Sign Company. And then when was it installed? It was installed in 1945. And it was actually delayed because this sign company had a guy that worked on high altitude work. And the person they had that did the high altitude work actually didn't do a very good job and fell and got killed. And they had to take a couple weeks to train his replacement.
Jeffy was his name, I think, the gentleman, because he came.
There was a guy that actually did the work.
Yes, and he came to a parade when we were celebrating one of the years of the bridge.
Yeah, he made the newspaper, and I remember that.
75th. Yeah.
But he had to be trained to work up there because his predecessor did not do it adequately. My safety officer would have had a hard time with it.
Did he die putting those letters up?
He didn't die putting those letters. It was leading up to that time. That, they put in the request, they said they were gonna have it ready by like October, and it wasn't because And the excuse that they had, the sign company had, was they're training a new person, that they do it as fast as they could. Now, the letter is also in that correspondence. They're 5 feet tall. 5 foot tall letters. Porcelain enamel material is what they're made out of. It's not wood. It's not copper. It's porcelain enamel. And total cost for installation. Now, if we can just get the other side of the viaduct done now.
Yeah. Or get the railroad to fix it.
We can't even get them to fix it.
Yes.
And the C is missing, and part of the K, and now part of the C is missing.
Yeah, but it went up in 1945, and honestly, it's been 60, 70 years now that it's been up, so.
I put a historical plaque on in 1975 on this bridge, driving out of town on the right.
Yeah. We do have some of the plaques that they design. I'm not sure. That's one of the terrible things working at Steamtown is I don't get to go visit places like this too often.
Didn't Canadian Pacific restore the Lock-on Railroad sign
I don't know.
sometime in the last 20 years?
Yeah.
No,
I don't
Yeah, they
know.
did the
I
bridge.
think I have a picture of them on a, sitting on a truss working on it.
Yeah. I don't know. Oh, actually, I'm getting done now. Whether you believe the impact of the railroad to be a good or a bad thing is an integral part of the history and economy of this area. You really need to understand what the railroad did here. It is doubtful that the DL&W scrimped a century ago and maybe used a steel viaduct and retained its old line, kind of like the Lehigh Valley did. We wouldn't be here today. So. And the research in this area is just beginning. I keep on telling you all, we have hundreds of thousands of documents. Many of those have been transcribed. I have a volunteer program where people do remote transcription from home. And I can do a search on any name you want, any location you want, combination of facts. I can dig it out of there. We have tens of thousands of photographs, hundreds of architectural drawings and maps, and it's just like a giant puzzle, trying to put some of the information together. So, that's the end of my little program.
Thank you.
So, any questions?
So when you got these records from Syracuse, did they have anything that was from the era of the original Factorville Tunnel being built?
Yes, I mean, they had stuff from the original Lickett's Gap Railroad, trustees of that particular railroad. We have a lot of information. A lot of it's not immediately accessible, some of it's being transcribed as we speak. So, we have some.
You want some of the Trolley Trail?
Not too much on the trolley trail. I haven't taken a good solid look at it. We, where these railroads crossed each other, there's information somewhere buried in there. Whether it's enough to give the answer to be the silver bullet, I don't know. But we may have some information on the trolley trails. Again, I'd like to walk and get a map out, get familiar with it while I still can.
There's lots of photos in the archives of construction of the Northern Electric, because it only got finished in Nicholson in 1912. And then beyond that, after that, and you can see them constructing part. In fact, you could see them constructing it leading up to Nicholson in some of the photographs that Pat has handed out.
Well, they wouldn't let it go into Montrose again, or by Ocean County, because Lehigh Valley would not allow it. And for
Ross.
I've seen indications that the Army at the time was fascinated with the fact that railroad first started using wireless radio.
Oh, yeah.
Is there any records of that at Steamtown?
We have a lot of documentation on that. They built a tower at Scranton on Radisson. I call it the Radisson Hotel, but it was the passenger station for the DL&W. They had a large antenna in Binghamton, another one in Hoboken. We We have photos showing them being used on a moving railroad train. However, during World War I, they discontinued the use because it was impacting ships at sea on their radio reception. So, but no, we have documentation in there and photographs dealing with the use of wireless radios. When I lived in Alaska, they used to joke, again, suppose how long ago they didn't have cell phones back then, and people would ask if they had telephones on the Alaska Marine Highway, which was the ferry service in Alaska. And they said, no, that they keep on getting crossed when the boats go by each other. That was where they had cell phones. Yes, sir.
How are the photographs that you have cataloged by photographer, by events, by structures?
I usually go with whatever system the photographer used. For the DL&W, they had a particular series of letters plus numbers assigned to them. So the A series pretty much dealt with anthracite mining in the area. The B series dealt with stuff that went on in Pennsylvania. The C series also dealt with Pennsylvania stuff. And then there's the X series, which dealt with stuff in New Jersey. A guy named Barry did most of those photos. So I pretty much try and use the system that the original person used when they created either the photographs or the other documentation. Because the railroad was pretty good at keeping their stuff straight.
They were one of the best at photographing their property.
They were one of the best. We do also have a small collection of Erie Railroad glass plates. We only have about 1,000 of them.
And Wilkes-Barre and Eastern.
A little bit of Wilkes-Barre and Eastern very well, since the subsidiaries. Because when you start talking about the DL&W and the Erie and the Lehigh Valley, those are the three main railroads, but they had so many subsidiaries that it really takes a bit to figure out what you're talking about. But with the corporate records of the DL&W and the Erie that we have at Steamtown, we have the subsidiaries as well, like the Leggett's Gap Railroad, Cobb's Railroad, all these other ones. It's mind-boggling. Yes, sir.
Did the Delaware Hudson Railroad have any last name, as I know, that railroad was in the anthracite region of the...
It was in the anthracite region. We might collect this stuff if it was available. The opportunity to have D&H stuff really hasn't presented itself for us. Yes, ma'am.
I have an obscure question. So when we're driving on the road, we see coming off the railroad tracks, the chute, that wood thing, and
Below Chinchilla.
so by Chinchilla, coming from the railroad tracks down the side of the hill, there's like this wood structure. And from the tracks down, and I'm like, what is that?
No, it was a waterway for the water to come down the mountain.
Oh, it was a waterway,
Yeah.
so it's not really related to the
No.
railroad, but it was to keep it off the.
Yeah, it was put in by the railroad.
Oh, I've always
They
wondered what
used to
that was.
build them here and there where it really washed away real bad.
Oh,
Yeah.
fascinating.
It actually washed away just recently.
It did.
Oh,
right,
and the big
that's all.
storm. Oh.
Well, thank you for answering that, because
I
I always
thought
wondered.
it was a coal chute. You know, they would take the coal from the train, shoot it down to a
No.
Yes, sir.
Pat, thank you very much. I have two comments. One, being visitors, we'd appreciate if you'd sign our book so we've got a record of the good folk that turned out today, and I hope you enjoy our station. Number two, we're so into recycling, but I wanted to point out, you saw a lot of timber cribbing and a lot of planks being used to construct the bridge, the tunnel, and so forth. And there was a contractor, a carpentry contractor in town named Galusha Rott. And on our State Street, there's about at least 5 or 6 cookie cutter type houses. If you were in one, you were in them all. And I understand that a lot of the structures and walls were built from the recycled timbers that the railroad had no use for after the contractors didn't have use for it. So it was recycled back in 1915.
The railroads were one of the biggest recyclers around. If there was any money to be made off of something, they did it. I don't know if anybody's been to Steamtown, but our administration building, there's an area right next door to it where they have large areas, and they used to have an overhead crane where it could actually sort out the recycling. And they even had a coal gasification plant there. They could take coal and make gas out of it for industrial uses. So, yeah, the Scranton yard. 100 years ago, it actually seems to be more modern than it is now. You know, between wireless radios, coal gasification, recycling of all the materials that they possibly can. I mean, we could learn some lessons back then.
Thank you.
Anything else? Yes, sir.
Do you have the like steam era photos of locomotives going over the viaduct? Because I don't see too many photos of.
We have a couple, but it's quite a distance. You can sort of make them out on top on some of them. And when they got the Union Pacific big boy in Steamtown, USA, moved to Scranton, there's a picture of it on the viaduct. But it's really hard, even with something as big as the big boy, to get a good picture from a distance.
Yeah. I see like an old. I have a book about the Blackwater Rail. I don't know how like photographers like back in the 50s were able to get on top of the viaduct to see like an F unit like an E and T F unit going on top of the viaduct. Like not too far from here, but if you go on the very top, there's a, when you go over the viaduct and it curves, that was a spot that a lot of photographers went on.
Yeah. Oh no, people love to take their pictures. Yes, sir.
There's Old Line Junction, when it came down, did it stop here? I mean, was this the last station of the old train, or did it go up further for freight?
There was a separate one for Factoryville, so the one that was to hop out of stop was also for Nicholson. Factoryville had a separate that service whose businesses after the cutoff was done.
This was the end, they took that.
The bridge was around, yeah.
The bridge was gone in 1916.
Oh, okay.
They
All right.
spelled
I
it
see.
right here.
I gotcha. Okay.
I know. He
It
had
just-
it from,
I'm from the Tunkhannock newspaper. Is there a chance I could get you to stand like catty corner with one of these slides behind you?
Be happy to.
With the hat on, right?
Yeah, no. Has anybody ever seen the movie Flash?
Yes.
That says how old I am. But I always say, well, it's kind of, you know, the hats. Has anybody seen in the movie Splash at the Statue of Liberty, there's a ranger giving a tour, and the ranger's talking about Lady Liberty and all this other kind of stuff, and he's a New Yorker, and he's talking real fast, and he's talking, and Daryl Hannah comes out, and she's stark naked, and it messes up his pants. So I always like to compare myself to that. I've never had my talks interrupted with that. But I do have my business card if anybody is interested in contacting me, although my phone number, my landline is out of order.
Using wireless.
Yeah, I have my personal cell phone that's on there. But anyhow.
Thank you, Pat. Let's give him a round of applause. Frank, I'll also say that there was a turntable just where the pump and pantry is here, and I have a blueprint that I bought from Bob Bars online on eBay probably 20 years ago. They took that turntable and put it up at Alford when they put, you know, the branch served Montrose. So as Pat said, right, the railroad recycled.
Point out that it was a manual turntable.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
back in the 80s, or maybe it might have been 90s, when CP had to go across to the other side and turn the engines and come back, they actually sat down and figured out, let's put the turntable back in because it would be cheaper than sending the engine all the way over and all the way back. And that's why in Binghamton, now it's the Norfolk Southern Yard, there is a turntable. I think it was the 80s or 90s. Would you know that pattern?
I'm not off my head. There's a lot of things I don't know. I have 4 boys in their 20s. Every day I know less.
So you're not in front of the camera, but I can see you closer into the picture.
Sandy, you got a
Is
question?
this from Nicholson Bridge? Right there.
Yeah, before they waterproofed it, put the track in.
The structure that still stands in Elford, is that a water tower? What is it?
No, it's a switch tower.
Switch tower.
Yeah, the passenger station, they just tore down, John, 2 years ago.
Is that
No,
the
it's
one
3 years.
that-
3 years
Is
ago.
that the one that just is?
Correct. Yeah, but the tower that's together is a switch tower.
Which means,
So it was used to switch tracks.
These fellows, are they working on the bridge or?
So-
Yeah, they're doing waterproofing. On the